sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, my phone just, turned off the live. So please post the link in the chat for the next live and let's just keep going. Sorry about that. Very frustrating. I don't know what happened there. It just kicked me out. The app just shut down. I hate it when it happens, especially when we're on a great kick. I mean, there's almost 300 people watching and we're doing great. And all of a sudden it kicks us out. So somebody please in the chat, please take the link and post it so people come. Here I am. I guess this live will be in two parts, right? The Silicon Valley fascists don't like me, I guess, but whatever. Whatever, folks. I'm gonna survive, and so are you. You'll survive as well. I mean, it's just this is a reality of doing these lives, right? Is sometimes the app shuts down. So please, let's bring everyone back. Bring everyone back. Post the new link so that everyone comes and continues. I'm not done talking. I've got a whole lot of super chats to get through, and that's fine. I've got plenty to say, and so do you. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. We're back, not going anywhere. So there you go. Yeah, there you go. All right. I think I answered the socialism in Africa question. Now, the next super chat question I had was about John Lennon, Jane Fonda, and the radicalization of celebrities in the 1960s and 70s. Well, first of all, you have to remember that, in the 1960s, you had the anti-Vietnam War movement, you had the civil rights movement, and you had a huge amount of interest in communism among younger people. And it was very much tied in with popular culture, the rock and roll music and such. And so, yeah, you had a rise of interest in communism. And John Lennon and Jane Fonda were very different in their radicalization. Now, John Lennon was from the Beatles, right? He was the Beatles music. And around the time that the Beatles broke up, John Lennon became very friendly with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, and he was in kind of a radical phase. And he gave an interview to the Red Mole, which was a Trotskyite New Left newspaper, edited by Tariq Ali. And he basically came out as a Trotskyist. John Lennon was basically saying he was a Trotskyite. He gave money to the Black Panther Party. And he didn't like Maoists. And in one of his songs, he had that line, if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. And he, in this interview, you can read the interview, it's on the internet. Tariq Ali was kind of a new left Trotskyite, interviewed John Lennon. And John Lennon, apparently, in the interview, he says, look, I don't like Maoism, but I'm a Trotskyite. And it was part of, he's more of a Trotskyite because he was from a working class town. He's from Liverpool, had a working class background. He was against the war. He was against racism, sympathized with the anti-racist struggles around the world. That was the hip, cool thing to do at that point. You have to remember all the cool kids were going to rallies and stuff. So, John Lennon, it wasn't a big thing, right? And a lot of people, there's kind of the cult of John Lennon, that John Lennon was just so amazing. And for a couple years, we're talking 1968, 1969, 1970, 1971, 72, 73, 74, John Lennon was hanging out in radical circles. There's a whole documentary, The United States versus John Lennon, that talks about how John Lennon, almost lost his visa to the United States. The Nixon administration very much tried to take his visa away and tried to prevent him from being in the United States because he was associated with the radical movements. And that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, John Lennon was planning to play at the protests against the Republican convention. In 1972, Nixon was running for re-election, and there was going to be protests against the Republican National Convention. John Lennon was planning to play at those protests, and in exchange for getting his visa to stay in the United States, he called off those protests. He agreed not to play at the protests, and so he got his visa, if I'm not mistaken. John Lennon was also revealed to have given quite a bit of money to the Workers' Revolutionary Party, which is a very interesting Trotskyite sect in Britain, led by Jerry Healy. The Healyites, they were called. Jerry Healy was this very large man, who was a Trotskyite in Britain. You can watch video of him, and he's yelling like this, I don't like capitalism, and I'm angry about... Is this very large, kind of large, overweight British man who gets very angry and he talks like this. He doesn't like capitalism. He was this very angry, large British man who was a Trotskyite in Britain. And he had a group called the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and they were very good at courting celebrities. The actress Vanessa Redgrave. Vanessa Redgrave was a very famous actress. She's still very famous. I think she's in movies still now. Very famous actress. She joined the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and they were a Trotskyite group. What's interesting is the Workers' Revolutionary Party of the United Kingdom was pro-Gaddafi. They supported Gaddafi. They supported the Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist Party and Saddam Hussein, and they supported, Hafez Assad and the Syrian government. Most Trotskyites didn't, and they took this kind of unique position of saying they said that Iraq and Libya and Syria were deformed workers' states, and they were pro-Palestine. They were very pro-Palestine. They were very anti-Israel. And Vanessa Redgrave made a documentary about Palestine that Gaddafi paid for, basically, and they screened it all over the world. And so Vanessa Redgrave, who was part of this Workers' Revolutionary Party, they went around the world screening this documentary about the Palestinians that had been, financed by Gaddafi. And so, the fact that they were supporting Gaddafi and they were supporting the anti-imperialist states of the Middle East, and they would talk about Palestine, when you have to remember, back then, you didn't talk about Palestine. It wasn't okay to start criticizing Israel and talking about Palestine in anti-war protests really until the 80s, right? All throughout the 1960s and 70s, because there was so much support for Israel among leftists, you didn't, at big anti-war rallies in D.C., Palestine was never discussed. And in fact, the first national anti-war protest to have a pro-Palestine speaker was in 1981. It was the People's Anti-War Mobilization of 1981. And that was the first, national rally, that was against war that had a Palestinian speaker. All throughout the Vietnam War, there'd be huge marches of hundreds of thousands of people that would march against the Vietnam War. There would not be any talk of Palestine. Palestine was taboo. So I will give kudos to the Workers' Revolutionary Party of Britain, as much as I don't agree with Trotskyism, as much as they were a very strange group. John Lennon gave them money, and they did talk about Palestine, and that's respectable. That's very, very respectable, right? But yeah, it was a strange Trotskyite group. John Lennon never joined them, but he wrote them some big checks, and he was persuaded to finance them to some degree or other. The Workers' Revolutionary Party, this pro-Gaddafi, pro-Assad, pro-Saddam Hussein, pro-Palestinian Trotskyite group in Britain, the Workers' Revolutionary Party. Now, Vanessa Redgrave was probably the actress that was the celebrity that they were most famous for associating with. But yeah, John Lennon gave them some money. He also gave some money to the Black Panthers. But really, after about 1974, John Lennon's not really talking political stuff. John Lennon's radicalism was a phase, okay? And the same for Jane Fonda. Again, it was a phase. It was popular at the time. Being a communist in the late 60s and early 70s was very, very trendy. And so they did it. It was the trendy, hip, cool thing to do. And John Lennon was this hip, cool rock musician. He was a Beatle, and so, it was the hip, cool thing to do, so he did it. And it's not that surprising. And he played at anti-war rallies. There's one album by John Lennon. It's called Sometime in New York City. And almost every song on the album is a political song. And honestly, it's not his best writing. The title track, "Woman is the N-word of the world," that's a little insensitive, isn't it? I mean, he didn't say N-word, okay? The title track has the N-word in it. And it's supposed to be about women's rights, but the line is, "Woman is the N-word of the world." That's a little cringe. Nowadays, people would be smart enough not to, no leftist would record a song with the N-word in the title, okay? But that was, but there's a song on that album for Angela Davis called Angela. There's a song on the album about Attica State, and there's a song supporting the IRA and the Irish liberation struggle. That's his most explicitly political album. It's called Sometime in New York City, and I believe it's a 1971, 72, Apple Music and Spotify. Okay, Apple Music and Spotify. So that's John Lennon. And, he was, again, John Lennon was a musician. Okay, he was famous for being a musician. He wasn't a political ideologue. You read the interview that he gave to the Red Mole to Tariq Ali; it's not very good. He doesn't quite know what he's talking about, right? And that's okay because he's a famous musician. He's not a political ideologue. And you listen to his album sometime in New York City. It doesn't have a clear political line. It's just kind of, it's on the right side of things, supporting the Black freedom struggle, anti-war, pro-Irish liberation. But again, he's a musician. He's a rock star, okay? And that's the thing. And that's what you need to remember about this. When celebrities get political, they often will get a huge, people will just start, just turning to them like they're the leaders of the movement. But you have to remember that, they didn't get famous for politics. Like Russell Brand, right? I agree with a lot of the things Russell Brand has said about this or that, but Russell Brand didn't become famous by being a political activist. He became famous by being an actor, and he's taken some radical stances. Good for him. But at the end of the day, I don't get my politics from Russell Brand. I get my politics from political figures, but, it's good when celebrities can take a radical position. Now, Jane Fonda is another story. Now, John Lennon, just talked about John Lennon. Now, the person asked about John Lennon and Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is a different story. Now, Jane Fonda, right, her father was a famous actress. She was, considered to be one of the most beautiful female stars in the late 1960s. And she turned against the Vietnam War. One of the most amazing things that Jane Fonda did was that she started playing shows for GIs, for guys, trying to encourage, U.S. Army soldiers to quit the military. That is huge, okay? You want to talk about risky behavior. It's one thing to go to an anti-war protest, but if you are, and she was, going around the world to U.S. military bases in Okinawa and in the Pacific and near U.S. military bases, putting on a show, urging U.S. soldiers not to fight in the Vietnam War. That is huge. Okay? And the amount of risk that she took in order to do that is very, very admirable. You want to talk about, and there's this whole thing, I grew up hearing about, the Vietnam vets, they ain't Fonda Jane and Hanoi Jane. Okay, this woman went around the world performing a show called FTA, it stood for F the Army, urging U.S. soldiers not to fight in Vietnam. And many didn't fight in Vietnam because of Jane Fonda's work. That's huge. And Richard Nixon, very much wanted to put her in prison for it, and the FBI was all over her. That is a contribution. Again, I can recognize now later, I don't agree with a lot of what Jane Fonda says now, but again, I can recognize that is huge respect points for me, okay? I mean, to have a Hollywood celebrity, consider she was the most beautiful woman, and to have her going around urging U.S. soldiers not to fight in Vietnam is such a huge contradiction, or such a huge contribution that she did that. Okay, everything that's come since then, she's disappointed me. I don't agree with a lot of what she puts out now, but that was huge. Okay. That was huge. And, what she did with that FTA roadshow was utterly amazing. And, people, they make it out like she hated the soldiers or something. No, she actually, she made a big point of trying to win the soldiers not to fight in the war. Now, she went to Vietnam, and she supported the Vietnamese people. She said the people of Vietnam are right to fight for their national liberation, and the U.S. imperialists are wrong. And she said, look, that people used to chant at anti-war rallies back in the day. They used to chant, one side's right, one side's wrong, victory to the Viet Cong, and that's basically what she was saying. The Vietnamese people had the right to fight for their national liberation as a country. There's nothing wrong with her saying that. She was absolutely right to say that. Now, she's apologized for a photo that she took with an anti-aircraft gun. Right? Vietnam, they had these anti-aircraft guns they would use to shoot down the Americans who were bombing them and killed millions of people. And she did a sexy photograph with an anti-aircraft gun. She's apologized for that. She says that wasn't the right thing to do. And honestly, I understand why she apologized for that, right? I mean, look, as much as, the Vietnamese people had every right to defend their homeland from people bombing them, and millions of people were killed by those bombs from the United States. So the Vietnamese people getting anti-aircraft guns and shooting down American aircraft. I mean, what would you do if someone was bombing this country? I mean, come on, right? I mean, the Vietnamese people had the right to defend themselves. I can understand why, as an American, it would be a mistake to pose with a weapon that's killing other Americans, right? It wasn't a smart decision. And she's apologized for that. And I think she's right? If I've been to many countries around the world, right? I've been to many countries that are not friendly with the United States. I wouldn't pose for a photograph with weapons that killed other Americans. I love other Americans. I don't want other Americans to be bombing people in other countries. I don't want other Americans to be, engaging in war crimes. But I would never pose with photographs of implements used to kill other Americans, right? That's not how communists should represent ourselves. We love our country. We love our people. We don't want our people to be hurt. We don't want Americans to be sent to unjust wars to die. So I understand, and I think she's right to apologize. That was not right for her to, it wasn't correct for her to, pose with that anti-aircraft gun. So I'm glad she's apologized for doing that. It was a mistake. Look, she was feeling very angry about the bombing of the people of Vietnam. Millions of people died from the U.S. bombing, and she was feeling very, very angry about it, and felt like the Americans who were bombing Vietnam, should be shot down. And she posed for that picture. Well, now she regrets it, and she's right to regret it. That said, though, what Jane Fonda did during the Vietnam War, urging U.S. soldiers to turn their guns around, or to lay down their arms and not fight in an unjust war, that was amazing. I mean, huge respect points. Now, what's interesting is Jane Fonda, it's pretty clear she was hanging out with Maoists in the early 70s. If you listen to her interviews, she was hanging out with, like, the Revolutionary Union, which was a precursor to the Revolutionary Communist Party, which was very heavily involved with Vietnam Veterans Against the War, VVAW. And she was hanging out with the Bay Area Revolutionary Union, what's now the Revolutionary Communist Party, but they were much bigger then and much more broad. It was the California Maoists. That's kind of who she was hanging out with. She made a movie with Jean-Luc Godard, who was a Maoist filmmaker from that time. She made a very good movie about workers in a French sausage factory who go on strike and seize their factory. It's a very good movie called Tout va bien. I recommend it. It's one of my favorite movies. It's about workers in Paris on strike, and it's about kind of processing the May of 1968 events and what it really meant for France, etc. So I recommend that. Unfortunately, Jane Fonda, she married Tom Hayden. Tom Hayden was a leader of Students for a Democratic Society. She married him, and in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, she supported Israel. And she went around, on a speaking tour, urging leftists not to protest against Israel. That was wrong. She's dead wrong about Israel. She's pro-Israel now. I'm not pro-Israel. She's pro-Israel. And now she's turned in, I wouldn't call Jane Fonda a socialist now. I mean, in the early 70s, she was hanging out with Maoists. She was going to Vietnam. She did amazing work against the Vietnam War. I would call her just kind of a liberal now. She's just kind of a liberal feminist now. And that's who she is now. But for a period, she was, again, in that period when it was very cool and hip to be an anti-war protester, that's what she did. That was good. There you go. I mean, it's, people change and they evolve over time. So for a few minutes, she was a communist, and then she wasn't. One thing that's kind of overlooked is that she and the actress I mentioned before, who was from the Workers' Revolutionary Party, Vanessa Redgrave, they made a very good movie in the late 1970s called Julia. And it's about a rich girl who joins the anti-Nazi resistance. And it's like a fictionalized account of the life of Lillian Hellman. That's a very good movie. Watch Julia. It's a great movie from the 1970s. And Jane Fonda stars in it along with Vanessa Redgrave. Great movie. Just a really beautiful movie. It's very sad. but it's about a rich girl who becomes a communist anti-Nazi resistance activist. It's a very good movie. It's very beautiful, and I would check out that movie if you get a chance. And Jane Fonda, and Vanessa Redgrave made that movie. It's very beautiful, very beautiful. And Vanessa Redgrave was a Trotskyite. Jane Fonda was kind of a Maoist, and whatever. I mean, that's history. But again, I'm talking about this because it's important. John Lennon and Jane Fonda both went through a phase of being communists, right? And then they stopped when the culture changed, when society changed. And the thing is, that's good. I'm glad they made their contribution. I would say Jane Fonda's contribution was much bigger than John Lennon's. But at the end of the day, don't get your politics from celebrities, right? Jane Fonda became famous by being an actress. John Lennon became famous by being a rock musician. And at the end of the day, don't get your politics from people. Get your politics from politicians. When you go to the doctor, you don't want a famous actor to treat your illness, right? You want a very good doctor to treat your illness, right? If your teeth are broken or you need dental care, you go see a dentist. You don't see a famous singer. You go see a dentist, right? So don't get your politics from celebrities, right? I'm glad celebrities can take a good political stance, but if your teeth are hurting, you go see a dentist. If if you need surgery, you go see a surgeon. Don't get your politics from celebrities. That's what I'm saying. So there you go. All right. My strength is starting to fade, folks. That's okay, but I'm going to get through these super chats, but I know I'm back and you all want to talk to me, but my strength is starting to fade here. So we're going to start, slowing down because I don't want to work too hard here. I'm still getting over my illness. So, all right. All right. Uneven and combined development. I think that can refer to economic development. Now in countries, there is, well, I don't know. I'm going to table that. I'll do that on a future live. Uneven and combined development. I'll just table that. All right. Russia and China divide. Russia and China divide. Yeah, I mean, there was the Atlantic Council came out with that document, calling for better relations with Russia. There's some sections of the ruling class that seem to want to unite with Russia against China. Donald Trump, in his interview before he ran for president, one of his first interviews he said, you can't have Russia and China together, and Obama has done that. Look, when the imperialists were able to have the Sino-Soviet split and were able to play Russia and China against each other in the Cold War, that was a huge victory for imperialism, right? Be able to divide two big socialist countries, the Soviet Union and China, to have them not aligned anymore. That was a huge victory for the imperialists. It started out with basically the Soviet Union was telling Mao to stop supporting people around the world that were fighting for their national liberation. Khrushchev had his doctrine of peaceful coexistence, and he was saying basically countries around the world can't have revolutions because the USA has the atomic bomb and it's too dangerous. And Mao had led a revolution of China, and he wasn't going to go along with that. So it started out that Mao was correct, and that there was a history of the Soviet Union kind of being somewhat arrogant in the way it treated the Chinese communists, etc. However, by the late 70s, China was aligning with U.S. imperialism. China supported Pinochet. China was, aligned with the CIA in Angola. And the Gang of Four, in response to the Soviet Union, took an ultra-leftist stance where they were aligning with the U.S. imperialists. So the Sino-Soviet split was bad. Now, China has apologized to Angola and to a lot of countries around the world for their positions during that period. But in the 70s, China started aligning with the United States internationally, in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and that was not right. So the Sino-Soviet split was very bad, but it won't happen again. You know why? Because the Sino-Soviet split, at the time it happened, China was still very poor, and it was not about ideology, mainly, right? It was about foreign policy. Now, Russia and China's relationship is economic. They are economically tied to each other, right? China is a huge manufacturing country. Russia is a huge energy exporter. China needs energy in order to build and keep, churning out products. It's this manufacturing hub. Russia needs to sell its energy. And Russia and China, despite their differences, they're economically tied to each other, okay? And so it's going to be much harder to pull them apart. It's not going to be a disagreement about foreign policy. It's about economics. The countries are economically tied to each other. So pulling Russia and China apart would be extremely difficult nowadays because it's not about ideology now. It's about economic ties. They are economically tied to each other. And the more the United States demonizes and wages economic warfare and imposes sanctions on both countries, the closer they're going to get to each other, right? They're going to need each other even more. So I don't see Russia and China being pulled apart from each other this time. All right. Socialist millionaires. Okay, look, it's socialist billionaires, first of all. You got to get it right, right? But no. What I'm actually saying on that point is that the goal of socialism is to create a society with vast abundance. So much abundance that the need for a state fades away. That's what, the Communist Manifesto, that's what Critique of the Goethe Program by Karl Marx call for. The goal of socialism is not to get rid of wealth. It's not to create more poverty, so it's fair, like libertarians always say. Libertarians are always like, oh, communists want to divide up everything and make everyone equally poor, so it's fair. No. The goal of socialism is to change the nature, the means of production, to have the means of production function in a rational way, no longer controlled by the anarchy of production, so that all of society becomes wealthier and wealthier, and inequality fades away amid vast material abundance, and eventually the need for a government fades away. That's the goal of socialism. The goal of socialism is to make society astronomically more wealthy than it already is. It's about expanding the level of abundance. That's what socialism is trying to do. If you read Marx, he's very clear about that. It's about creating a higher level of abundance. It's not lowering consumption, right? It's not convincing people to be more frugal. No. The goal of socialism is to create so much abundance in society, so much wealth, that the need for a government fades away, that inequality fades away, and that work becomes basically something people do to keep from being bored, right? If you read, this is the Critique of the Goethe Program. Karl Marx blatantly spells it out. Only when that level of abundance is created can you have a stateless, classless world. That's the goal. It's reorganizing the economy, having the means of production, the banks, the factories, the major industries, and the centers of economic power operate rationally to get to a post-scarcity world. There is nothing in what I just said that says support Jeff Bezos. There is nothing in what I just said that says, oh, support the capitalists of the United States. When people say that's what I said, they're lying, okay? So if people want to lie, I can't argue with you. If you're going to distort my positions, you're going to pretend I'm saying things that I did not say, I can't help you, all right? That's what that means, right? Marx said that the higher stage of communism, the world of vast abundance, which there's no class division, in which labor becomes life's prime want, meaning people work because they feel like it, there's no compulsion to work, in which there is no division between mental and manual labor. That is the ultimate goal, and Marx, in his Critique of the Goethe Program, one of his most important pamphlets, makes clear that that is only possible with vast material abundance, with everyone being far, far wealthier than even the richest people are in our time. That's basic Marxism. Basic Marxism, okay? And go read the Critique of the Goethe Program. I didn't say it, Marx did. U.S. death squads in Haiti. This is basic Marxism. This is Marxism 101, okay? So, if you don't agree with that, that's fine. You're disagreeing with Marx. You're not disagreeing with me, right? And that is not, let me emphasize, that is not an endorsement of any of the capitalists of this system. Okay? And when people say that Caleb supports Jeff Bezos, they're lying. Okay? They're just lying. And when people lie, you can't engage with them. Certain people who will not be named, Skippy the Bear, I just named him, Skippy the Bear, others, they are liars, okay? And if you're watching this right now, and you were told by one of them that I support the billionaire capitalists of the United States, you got duped. You got lied to. And you should never, never believe what one of these people say again. Right? And I don't understand this, right? If someone can lie that blatantly, and distort my position so blatantly. Right? I mean, I'm all over the internet. I've written whole books ranting against the U.S. ruling class. I'm explaining a basic Marxist concept, which has been lost by these left book losers. But if you think that somehow, if you've been lied to and told that somehow I support the billionaire ruling class of the United States, and why would you ever believe these people again? Ever. I mean, these people have lied to you, okay? They've lied to you. And if you keep believing them, you're intentionally following somebody who lies, right? Who lies. I am not saying anything that Karl Marx did not say. The goal of socialism is a world with vast abundance, so much abundance that the state withers away and there's vast prosperity for all. All right? And that would mean everyone's wealthier than even billionaires are in our time. Right? A society with no compulsion to work, right? A society with no division between mental and manual labor, a society where labor becomes life's prime want, as Karl Marx says, meaning people work because they feel like it, a society with no coercion to work, a society where the government itself fades away. The ultimate goal of communism is a goal that has everyone being far wealthier than billionaires are in our time. Go read the Critique of the Goethe program. All right. Next, Biden, Carter, and Iran. I guess the person who gave the super chat was saying that Jimmy Carter's presidency failed because of the Iranian Revolution, and that Biden's presidency will also fail because of the Iranian Revolution. Well, we shall see, won't we? We shall see. I mean, Biden, making that decision to attack Iran. I think Biden. There's a lot of people in Biden's camp that want to bring back the Iran nuclear deal, but good luck. Good luck. I mean, after what Trump did, it's going to be very difficult. So, is the USA truly capitalist and democratic, is the question. The USA is definitely truly capitalist, right? Because capitalism is a system where the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries operate according to profit, and the profit system, not according to public good. That's capitalism. Profits in command, that's capitalism. Frederick Engels said capitalism is when the means of production function only, Capitalism is when, under capitalism, the means of production function only as preliminary transformation into capital. That's Frederick Engels, the anarchy of production, profits in command. That's what capitalism is. That's America. Definitely a capitalist society. Democratic, see, democracy is a vague concept. Democracy just means the rule of the people. The rule of the people. You could have a monarchy that would be democratic if the people overwhelmingly wanted that monarch, and the monarch was in power. That would be the rule of the people. Democracy is a very vague concept. Democracy means the rule of the people, and in ancient Greece, the term democracy was considered derogatory. Right? In ancient Greece, they talked about three modes of government, and there was a good form of each and a bad form of each. Monarchy was the good form, but monarchy, they argued, thank you, well, you're very welcome. China is a very important country, and the anti-China campaign is disgusting. Monarchy, in ancient Greece, was good, but it could degenerate into tyranny. Right? They said oligarchy was good, right? The rule of a small few, but it could degenerate into plutocracy. And they were against plutocracy. And they said the republic, the elected government, was good, but a republic could degenerate into democracy, which they said was vulgar mob rule, right? And so the word democracy goes back to ancient Greece, but they meant it in a negative way. They meant it in a negative sense, right? Just like that monarchy was the good king, bad king is a tyrant. Good elite is an oligarchy, bad elite is plutocracy, and, good elected government is republic, bad elected government is democracy, right? So democracy literally just means the rule of the people, but in ancient Greece it was the negative. It was the negative. The good elected government was the republic, the mob rule and chaos was democracy. Democracy is very hard to define, right? It means the rule of the people. People say, well, if there's elections, if they have the consent of the governed, then it is democratic. Well, I mean, what if it's like here in the United States, where the two major parties are controlled by major corporations, the media, social media as well as TV media and print media is dominated by major corporations. I mean, there's an ultra rich elite that controls the United States, but every 4 years we get to go out and vote. So is it a democracy? Well, look, you voted for it, right? I mean, it's a vague concept. Get over this concept, right? Democracy is so vague. Right? I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just a vague concept, okay? It doesn't really mean anything, okay? It means the people rule. Well, we in any society at this level of development, we're not in full communism. In any society with this level of development, you're going to have some people with more influence than other people, right? People who own big corporations are going to have way more influence in this society than average people are. Elected officials are going to have way more influence over policy than average person who goes and votes every 4 years, right? When you have a society with this level of development, there is going to be some people that have way more influence than others. And those who control the means of production, the private corporations who own the means of production, are going to control society by de facto because they control the means of production. Even though everyone gets to vote, those who control the means of production are going to rule, right? And, I've used this example many times. In Iran, they have elections. They have multiple parties, they have elections, but they have this thing called the Guardian Council. And the Guardian Council is made up of religious leaders, and they decide which candidates are allowed to run and which candidates are not. And people look at that and they say, well, that's not democratic. Well, we have the same thing here in the United States. We have a Guardian Council, but it's not official. It's not in law. It's called the capitalists, the billionaires, the bankers, the people who own the means of production, the big corporations, right? And if they think that you're too radical or then you don't get to run. And they decide, basically who's treated as a legitimate candidate and who's not. Well, it's a de facto Guardian Council made up of the people with the wealth. In Iran, the Guardian Council is not de facto. It's made up by the people who control the means of production. Who? The Ayatollahs, the people that led the Islamic Revolution, right? The people who led the revolution. They control the big oil wells and the big banks. They control the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the biggest economic entity in Iran. The steel mills are government run. The car manufacturing is largely government run. And, in Iran, the means of production is controlled by the Ayatollahs and the religious leaders, the leaders of the Islamic Revolution. And it's a big movement. You got the Basij councils in local areas. You've got, the supreme leader at the top. You got the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. But the leaders of the revolutionary movement in Iran, they decide who gets to be treated as a legitimate candidate. Just like the leaders, the people who control the means of production in the United States, are able to determine who's treated as a legitimate candidate in America. So is Iran more democratic than the United States? I mean, which one's more democratic? I mean, you have more freedom of speech in the United States than you have in Iran. There's certainly less restriction on individuals here in this country, right? There's more access to information here in this country. The internet is much less regulated and such. So I guess, in the sense that we have more civil liberties here, it's more democratic. But at the end of the day, in Iran, the people who control the means of production decide who's allowed to run for office. In the United States, the people who control the means of production decide who's allowed to run for office. Real democracy, right? Meaning like equal access to decision making, like total democracy, like where, is something that's only really going to be possible in a post-scarcity society approaching communism, right? I mean, as you approach communism, as you have a huge amount of vast material abundance in society, where inequality has broken down because there's just so much prosperity, then you could start to have a society where everyone would start to have almost equal influence on society, right? And then, even then, the state democracy itself might fade away. So, we need to get beyond this notion of democracy as this ideal. Democracy just means the rule of the people, right? And it's like you could have a country full of racists, right? A country full of racist people, right? Who believe in hate and racism, and they could elect a racist government that went out and committed genocide, and that would be democratic. Why? It's the rule of the people. All the people happen to be racist. And get beyond this democracy. This is the U.S. thing. We're spreading democracy around the world. democracy is just, it's a meaningless word, right? It's another great example. When I was a kid, USA invades Iraq. Remember this? The USA invaded Iraq, right? It's like people have forgotten about this. Like, that was a very important event in my political education. And people have seemed to forgot this. But the USA invades Iraq, says Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Big fat lie. USA invades Iraq. And what did they do? What did they put up everywhere? The signs they put up everywhere said, support the troops. Support the troops. Support the troops. What did that mean? What does support the troops mean? I mean, what does it mean? I mean, it meant nothing, right? I mean, you know, everyone, bumper stickers at school, you know, big posters everywhere. And what does it mean? It meant nothing. Support the troops. What are we going to, you know, I mean, support the troops, you know, what does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Democracy doesn't mean anything, right? It just means the people rule. Like I said, you only have a true democracy when you're approaching a stateless, classless society. In every society, those who control the means of production, the entity that controls the means of production, is going to basically rule de facto. You know, and until we have a society where everyone has equal access to the means of production, like a stateless, classless world, you're not going to really have true democracy. Some people are going to have more access than others. It's a meaningless phrase, okay? It just means the rule of the people, right? If you ask me, are you for democracy? Sure, I'm for democracy. I'm for the rule of the people. I'm for the rule of the people, sure. What does it actually mean, though? It's a vague, it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just, it's like support the troops. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just, but you're supposed to be for it. And that's, America is a democracy, and democracy is freedom, and freedom is good. It's like, you know, and support the troops. America is the greatest country in the, it's again, I've gone over with you all the origin of the word, where it came from. I've talked about Iran's democracy versus America's democracy. You know, just, we need to get beyond this, like, shallow propaganda thinking, okay? And it's a big hurdle to get over, right? A lot of people, and this is very important, there's a very important pamphlet by Vladimir Lenin, and it's called Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. And in that pamphlet, Lenin talks about how, look, the error that social democrats make is that social democrats really believe that bourgeois democracy is possible. They see their mission as making capitalist societies democratic. Right? They say, look, capitalism, because of capitalism, the USA isn't really democratic. And our mission is to make American democracy more democratic. Well, that's not the Marxist view. Marxism understands that democracy is just it's a shell, okay? It's just a thing that, you know, that it's about class struggle. It's about who controls the means of production. That's what it's really about. It's not about democracy, right? And that, yes, social democrats, they generally say, well, we want to make the USA really a democracy. You know, the corporations rule in the United States, but with socialism, we're going to make the USA truly democratic. And no, you're not, right? Under socialism, there's going to be people that have more influence than others. There's going to be elected officials. There's going to be, you know, socialist organizations. There's going to be a state that controls the means of production. And the people in that state are going to have more influence than average people, right? And that you know, I mean, you could argue that socialism will be more democratic in the sense that, you know, it'll be a state that is working in the interests of average people that controls the means of production, and that average people will have more input. But at the end of the day, I mean, you know, it's not going to be an ultra democracy. Everyone's not going to have the same access to leadership. And yes, the group that controls the means of production is going to ultimately control the political system, not the people that don't. I mean, it's, you know, so there you go. All right. Enough on that. But I recommend, go read The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky by Lenin. It's a very important pamphlet because he says, look, you know, that, you know, having a revolution is the most undemocratic thing you could possibly do. Think about it, right? Having a revolution, that's not democratic, right? You know, rising up and, you know, seizing control of, that's not democratic, right? I mean, you know, and that, no, the goal is not to just make the USA true to its rhetoric about democracy. The goal is to build a stateless, classless world based on vast material abundance. The goal is to break down all divisions in society and create a stateless, classless world. And the road to doing that is having the means of production controlled by all of society, not controlled by a small group of wealthy owners. It's about getting rid of profits in command. That's the goal, right? The goal is to get beyond the system where profits come before people. So there you go. All right, enough about that. Someone said Libya versus Nigeria. Nigeria is the top oil exporting country in Africa now. Prior to 2011, Libya was the top oil exporting country in Africa. In Libya, with its socialist system, the population very much benefited from the oil exports. Very high life expectancy, free education, huge rise in living standards. They built the world's largest irrigation system, etc. Nigeria, they're exporting lots of oil, and they're dirt poor, and there's all kinds of malnutrition, and people are starving and hungry, and American corporations are making out like bandits, and there's like one or two like Nigerian billionaires who are getting their share of it, and the population is impoverished. Socialism versus capitalism. Very good example. Very good example. All right. The Alaska meeting, look, Antony Blinken lecturing China about human rights and saying that China, accusing China of all kinds of stuff, and, are we surprised? No. Are we surprised? No. Is the propaganda against China going to intensify? Yes. Yes. And we all need to be trying to find a way to talk to our coworkers, talking to our friends, trying to stop the lies against China, because the demonization of China is very extreme right now. The propaganda is only going to intensify as time goes on. So yeah, we need to fight the lies. We need to stand up for the truth. Just like with Russia, All right, next question. MLs versus Maoists. Look, Mao Zedong, right? Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution. He studied Marxism-Leninism. He was the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. He applied it to China, and he had some unique formulations. He realized that in China it would be the peasantry who would be the backbone of the revolution. It wouldn't be the factory workers like in Russia. Mao, he applied some unique Chinese cultural things to building the Chinese Communist Party. Mao was very influenced by Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist. What else? Mao was also very influenced by the Taiping Uprising, right? The Taiping Uprising was a peasant uprising that happened in China a couple decades before Mao was born. It was a huge uprising of peasants in China, and they were following a guy who claimed to be Jesus' younger brother, who was going to create some kind of utopian socialist heaven on earth or something, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom or something like that. Mao applied Marxist-Leninist principles to China. Mao was a genius, right? He was a genius. He understood Chinese society. He built a revolutionary organization that was capable of making China a socialist country. And he had a brilliant tactical mind. Mao is going to be remembered as one of the greatest leaders in world history. Mao started China on a course that has shaken the world. If you look at what China is now, and you look at what China was 100 years ago, Mao did that. Mao did that. And that is utterly amazing. It is utterly amazing. I agree, Comrade T. And what Mao did is unprecedented. Never have we seen a country do so much of a 180. China was the sick man of Asia, mass starvation and death and underdevelopment. And because of Mao, now China is the largest economy in the world. It has outstripped the United States in terms of economic output. China has the biggest what Mao did, the process that Mao began in the countryside with his, Red Army, has resulted in shaking the entire world, okay? So Mao, a Marxist-Leninist, was influenced by Peter Kropotkin, influenced by the Taiping Uprising, deeply well-studied in Chinese traditional culture, and, Mao was influenced by all kinds of things. Mao, what Mao did was unprecedented. So Mao is worth studying. And in the Center for Political Innovation educational manual, We Are City Builders, there is a speech by Mao in here. The last text, there's two speeches by Mao in here, but this last speech, this last text called, Talk on the Question of Philosophy. This is Mao speaking to a group of students in 1964. And it's a very important speech. And you read it, and you'll understand Mao's method of applying dialectical materialism. And he talks about how he was influenced by Benjamin Franklin. And he talks about how he was influenced by Confucius. And he talks about the Chinese Civil War. And he talks about building socialism and the laws of history. And Mao was the genius, okay? So I have absolute admiration for Mao. I think the Cultural Revolution was bad. And that was a huge mistake. And I think that was wrong. And I think that Mao also, his foreign policy in the 1970s was very problematic. Aligning with the U.S. imperialists against the Soviet Union was not good. Okay? So there's room for criticism. But ultimately, again, Mao made such an amazing contribution, that we don't even know. Long after Stalin and Lenin are forgotten, Mao is going to still be remembered. People now, still today, are talking about Julius Caesar. People now, still today, are talking about Alexander the Great of Greece. People are going to be talking about Mao 2,000, 3,000 years in the future. They're going to be talking about Mao, okay? So Mao is going to be remembered as one of the most important leaders in history, okay? Like him or hate him, just deal with it, okay? However, there are a group of people on the internet. In global communism, there are many different interpretations and viewpoints, okay? There are many different communists around the world with different views, and there's a grouping that call themselves MLM, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, okay? That is not a fair representation of what Mao was all about. Okay? And, there's the Naxals in India. There was a very crazy, violent group in Peru called the Shining Path, El Sendero Luminoso. And there's some crazy people, some like crazy teenagers running around, waving the red book here in the United States and, threatening people on the internet and, doing crazy stuff. And those people are not representative of Mao and who he was, okay? This is an ultra-leftist current, right? These are people that don't support modern China, that say China became capitalist in 1976. These are people in India who don't... India has the second largest working class in the world. Huge factories, huge labor union movement. The farmers of India, these people don't support any of that, right? They're in the countryside trying to do rural people's war, just like Mao did in the 1930s, okay? And the Shining Path in Peru, would routinely murder other communists, right? The leaders of communist factory workers in Peru would get shot by these Maoists, they were called, from the Shining Path. And I have talked to Peruvian communists, many of them. Everyone I've ever met hates the Maoist El Sendero Luminoso. Many of them tell me they think it was a CIA group. I don't have any evidence to back that up, but that's what they believe. The Naxals in India. Again, in India, there's a huge Communist Party, Communist Party of India, Communist Party of India Marxist, which started out as a China-aligned group, which you could say it's Maoist, but it's not like the Naxals. There's the Socialist Unity Center of India, which studies Mao, but there's this group called the Naxals, and they're in the countryside, kidnapping people and assassinating people and murdering leaders of other communists. They don't represent Mao, right? Gonzalo in Peru and the Shining Path, and the Naxals in India, and a bunch of crazy teenagers on the internet in the United States who admire them and think all other communists are fake and revisionists. They hate Cuba, they hate Venezuela, but they love the Naxals in it. These people do not represent what Mao is all about. Mao was not like these people. Mao is not like these people, okay? These are crazy extremists, and they don't represent... Mao was a genius. Mao aligned with Chiang Kai-shek. Did you know that? Somebody tweeted at me the other day, when I was advocating an alliance, that's almost as dumb as saying Mao should align with Chiang Kai-shek. Well, Mao did align with Chiang Kai-shek, right? First, Mao and the Chinese communists joined the nationalist KMT movement, and they were part of it. And then when Chiang Kai-shek started attacking them, they went into the countryside. But then when Japan invaded China, Mao and Chiang Kai-shek had an alliance against the Japanese invaders. And Mao wanted to form a joint government, a coalition government with Chiang Kai-shek after the war, right? Mao was a brilliant tactician. Mao knew how to make alliances with people. Mao knew how to bring people together and build a big alliance. Mao, he worked with the Soviet Union. Mao, worked with the peasantry. He worked with the trade unions. He worked with even some of the capitalists. The time the Chinese Revolution happened, a lot of the capitalists supported it. They thought it was good for China. There were a lot of capitalists who supported Mao when he first took power. So Mao is this political genius. And these people on the internet, they like Mao because he had a gun. Okay? They think, wow, Mao had a gun. Yeah, guns, revolution, killing. Woo, I like violence. These people really, they're not Maoists. They are Blanquyists, right? Louis-Auguste Blanqui was a revolutionary leader in France at the time that Marx was alive. And Marx and Blanqui did not agree with each other because Blanqui said that it's all about violence. Right? He said, people jokingly called Blanqui the surprise communist. Like Blanqui was saying, we just have a coup, we have the military take over the French government, and then we can just declare communism. Well, Marx said, no, you have to have class struggle. You have to mobilize the workers to fight for their rights. No. But Blanqui said, oh no, it's all just a military struggle. The state is run by evil capitalists. We're going to have a military coup. We take over the state, then we make communism. Yeah, and Marx is saying, no. We're trying to build a working class movement. We're trying to build up working class power. It's not just this military. There was a difference between the Blanqui current, Louis-Auguste Blanqui, and the Marxists. They didn't agree. They had different views. These people are Blanquists. They don't believe in economics. They don't understand workers and capitalists. All they understand is things under this system are bad. Things under this system are bad. When we take over, with guns in our hands, we're going to have a war and we're going to take over the government. Then we're going to make it good. Yeah. It's this stupid military fetish ideology. It's very juvenile. It's very adolescent. And they're very, very naive. They think things that don't make sense. They say that, the Soviet Union became capitalist in 1956. That's ridiculous. Right? What changed how did the means of production change in China in 1956? That doesn't make any sense. They don't support existing socialist countries like Cuba, like Venezuela. They absolutely don't understand economics at all. They don't understand class struggle and what Marxism is really about. Their view is basically the government is bad, and when we take over, the government will be good. Why? Because we're revolutionaries, man. It's very, very, naive. Now, here in the United States, they act stupid, they get into fistfights with other leftist groups or whatever, but in India, and in Peru, they cut people's heads off, and they murder people. And their violence tends to be directed not at the capitalist system, but at other communists who don't agree with them. And that's pretty disgusting. So, not a big fan of these MLMs that they call themselves, these people on the internet who think they're Maoists. But, yes, I think very highly of Mao. I do not think very highly of MLMs, okay? And I think there's a difference there. So there you go. All right, next question. Germany, tech so far ahead. Okay. All right, I'm fading here fast, but that's okay. So there you go. All righty. All right, the next question was about peak oil. Well, peak oil was widely believed in the 90s, right? It was this belief that we're going to run out of oil and it'll end, human civilization. And it didn't happen. Why? Fracking, deep sea drilling. We're not going to run out of oil. Not going to run out of oil. So, yeah, the way human beings interact with resources changes. Right? Humans are constantly inventing new ways to interact with their environment. So, the peak oil thing, it didn't happen, right? And there were a lot of people who really believed it. They really believed we were going to run out of oil. It's going to be the end. Well, it didn't happen. right? Now, we do need to get off of oil. We do need to get to a better energy source. I agree. I'm not a fan of continuing the fossil fuel economy, but peak oil was this theory that we were just going to, in 10 years, we're going to run out of oil and it's going to end Western civilization or something. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. All right. All right. Climate reparations, Green New Deal. Look, I like the idea of a Green New Deal. Okay? The concept is very good. The idea is that fossil fuel based economy is bad for the environment, which it is. It's creating climate change, which it is. And so, based on that, we need to adjust to a better, a better form of energy consumption and energy production. And in order to do that, we need an infrastructure program, like a New Deal, to rebuild the country. I like that. I like the concept of the Green New Deal, right? However, I don't like the actual plan. The actual plan involves, replacing coal power plants with windmills and Trotsky and fascist aesthetics. Replacing coal power plants with windmills and solar panels, and that's not enough. That's not going to work. Not going to work. Not going to work. We need nuclear power plants. We need fusion energy. And no, I mean, the idea that we're going to reduce energy consumption, right? The goal of the Green New Deal as it currently exists is to reduce energy consumption throughout the United States. Basically, make the population much, much poorer, right? Basically, the idea is you use too many resources, you eat too much food, you have too much electricity in your home, you use too much water. So we're going to squeeze you down to a lower level of consumption. And on top of that, we're going to replace like very high levels of energy output, like coal, with windmills and solar panels, and we're going to reduce the amount of energy that I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I do like the concept of the Green New Deal. I like the concept, but I don't like the actual proposal. Now, I'm very happy to see that AOC and Bernie Sanders both support nuclear power. That's very good. I'm very happy with that. It was not clear. And I think they should rewrite the Green New Deal so it includes more nuclear power. Get rid of the coal power plants, right? Get rid of oil power and replace it with nuclear energy. Look, if Texas had nuclear energy, their power grid wouldn't have exploded during the winter. I mean, it wouldn't have gotten overloaded the way it did. Look, I mean, get funding for fusion energy research, for goodness sakes. Putin has called for Russia and China and the United States to come together and get on fusion energy. I mean, the concept of the Green New Deal is good. The actual Green New Deal, not so much. All right. Anyone who's telling you we need to reduce consumption, that's Malthusianism. That's what that is. That is Malthusianism. Reduce consumption. When you hear the words reduce consumption, run. Run. That's useless eaters. You're a burden on the human race. Yeah. Anyone who starts telling you we need to reduce consumption, get the hell out of there. Right? The concept of the Green New Deal, good. Actual Green New Deal, not a big fan. All right. But I'm glad that AOC supports nuclear power. All right. Immigration crisis and climate change. Well, look, I think the main force driving the immigration crisis is not climate change. It's economics. It's the advances in technology. We don't have room at the assembly line for these people. Modern farming has been mechanized. Obviously, like the droughts that happen and things that are related to climate change will add to it. But ultimately, the driving force behind immigration is the breakdown of capitalism. Climate change is a side effect of the breakdown of capitalism, that we can't get off of fossil fuels even though we need to. But at the same time, the driving force behind immigration is an economic crisis. It's that the capitalist system doesn't have room for millions of people, right? That's the driving force behind the problem. All right. Community refute libertarianism. Well, look, there's a lot of things to refute libertarianism about. Socialism turned Russia and China into superpowers. Libertarian economics has been ruining the United States for decades. I mean, countries around the world that had shock therapy, free market, Shackmanite Trotskyites, had free market economic reforms, obviously fell apart. So, it was a disaster. So there's many examples of that. All right. All right. Will China be nuked? China has nukes. They'll defend themselves. China has nuclear weapons as well. Nuclear war is a disaster. We don't want nuclear war. So there you go. All right. The Ukraine Russia conflict. Well, look. The people of the eastern regions, they are fighting for their freedom. They don't want to live under the ultra nationalist government in Kiev. And that struggle is continuing. And the U.S. imperialists are not happy. I missed a super chat. What did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? Indian farmers strike. Indian farmers strike. The people of the eastern regions don't like that pro CIA Western. Cuba, DPRK. All right. Okay. So there you go. All right. Okay. All right. Imran Khan. He's the president of Pakistan. He has been pushing the Pakistan-USA economic corridor. That's good, right? To have a president of Pakistan who wants to work with China, who wants to expand economic development in that region. That's good. I tend to think of him as being more positive than negative. I mean, he's not a socialist. It would be great if he was starting to move, Pakistan towards socialism. That would be a good thing. Some people have criticized him, said he panders to some of the more like Islamist and Wahhabi forces in the country. That's obviously not good. But overall, the fact that he is friendly to China, the fact that he's trying to economically develop Pakistan, the fact that he's more critical of Western capitalism, I view him as more positive than negative in terms of world leaders. Imran Khan, I see him in a more positive light. Look, his career started with calling out the drone strike program and talking about how evil the drone strike program from the U.S. was. I like that. That's good. So I see him in a more positive light. But ultimately, is he a revolutionary? Is he a communist? No. All right. How do you apply the method of Marxism, organizing in your community? Well, what you need to do is you need to find the center of the action in your community, right? In your community, there are struggles going on, whether those are struggles for workers' rights, struggles against police brutality, struggles around community issues. You need to find the center of the action in your community. What are the major contradictions in your community? Find out what they are, and then go to the correct side of those contradictions and engage with the people on the right side and teach them Marxism while helping them be progressive. The issue in your community is police brutality. Go protest police brutality. And while you protest police brutality, educate the other people in your community about communism. If the issue in your community is the labor unions and the fight for jobs, join, with the labor union organizers. Go to their community support meetings, support their efforts, and at the same time, educate people about Marxism. You want to start a reading group in your community, do it. We are city builders. This textbook, the Center for Political Education, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. You can start having a reading group in your community about Marxism. You can do it, right? There's nothing holding you back. If you want to get this in bulk, just send me an email. I can arrange for you to get a bulk order at a much lower cost. And the main thing is to be finding the contradictions, joining with the progressive forces, but engaging in education at the same time and getting to the masses, getting to average people, not being part of the movement, but getting to the masses of people and raising issues in your community and showing how your community is being affected by the breakdown of capitalism, why socialism is the answer, and I would encourage you to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation. All right. I don't know enough about Apple Music and Spotify to comment on that. U.S. death squads in Haiti. Look, I did a great interview with Danny Shaw, and he was in Haiti. He's been involved. He went there, and I mean, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the people of Haiti are in revolt against an austerity regime that is undemocratic, and they're in revolt, and the USA is aligned with the security forces there that are brutally suppressing people. Watch the interview I did with Danny Shaw. He gets into great detail about that. All right. Why was German tech ahead in World War II? I'm not sure that's actually true. I don't know enough to... they didn't develop the atomic bomb. The United States did. I'm not sure German technology was ahead in World War II. All right. Trotsky and the fascist aesthetic. Well, look, I'm being provocative there, but fascism is not an aesthetic. It's not an aesthetic. Okay? Fascism is when capitalism capitalism breaks down and sets up kind of an illiberal authoritarian regime to try and hold off the threat of revolution. As capitalism becomes less and less stable, you have Bonapartist struggles in the ruling class. One faction of the ruling class will seize power and set up a very authoritarian state and unleash vast amounts of violence and chaos and destruction in order to keep power. That's what fascism is. And, that's what fascism actually is. Now, the liberals, Susan Sontag, a lot of the people associated with Partisan Review magazine, Theodore Adorno, author of The Authoritarian Personality, they have this whole formulation about what fascism is. And they don't think that fascism is what I just said, of capitalism breaking down, becoming authoritarian, unleashing violence and destruction. They think fascism is uniforms, fascism is fiery speeches, fascism is, certain aesthetic traditions, and they have this whole like silly psychological aesthetic definition of fascism. So I made a video to be provocative, pointing out that what these silly liberals like Susan Sontag and Adorno think fascism is actually was probably heavily influenced by Leon Trotsky, because during the Russian Civil War, Trotsky was the chief propagandist for the Red Army. And what Trotsky did during the Russian Civil War was he put on a crazy costume with leather pants and this like visor helmet, and he went from military base to military base in Russia, speaking to the Red Army. And it was a very wild show, right? That he would go to the base, and they would have all the deserters who had tried to run away lined up like they were going to execute them. But then Trotsky would come in and it'd be like, ready, aim, and then Trotsky would be like, stop. And it was staged, and he would save their lives. Stop. And he would stop the execution of the deserters. And he would give this fiery speech to the deserters about why they shouldn't run away and they should join the Revolutionary Army. And the soldiers would break down crying that their lives had just been saved. And, and then he would, give this, and he was wearing the leather pants and the hat and, yelling and speaking, and doesn't this remind you of the fascist, And so then in his speech, Trotsky would pull out a gold watch, and he would pick out one soldier and give him a gold watch and say, in a future Soviet society, all workers will have a gold watch, and everyone would burst into applause. Yay, a gold watch. And it was this traveling road show that Trotsky put on during the Russian Civil War. And the aesthetics of the road show, very military, fiery speeches, was a little bit fascist, right? If you think fascism is an aesthetic, then it makes sense that that aesthetic that Susan Sontag says military uniforms and fiery speeches and enacting the will of the people, that this is fascist. Well, if you think that fascism is an aesthetic, you have to admit Trotsky had a lot to do with that aesthetic. For example, Goebbels, who was the chief Nazi propagandist, Goebbels, his favorite movie was the battleship Potemkin. He was just a propagandist. And he saw that in the 1920s, the Bolsheviks made this amazing propaganda film called The Battleship Potemkin. Goebbels loved it. And Nazi propaganda films, like Triumph of the Will and The Eternal Jew, were very much inspired by the Bolshevik aesthetics, right? That the Bolshevik propaganda films inspired the Nazi films. They had very different messages, but there was kind of a similar aesthetic. And so if you think fascism is an aesthetic, you have to admit that Trotsky and the early Russian Revolution and its aesthetics, which Trotsky as the chief propagandist was very heavily involved with, then they basically, what they consider to be the fascist aesthetic, and what they consider to be the fascist aesthetic is very much rooted in propaganda techniques that Trotsky was involved in implementing in Russia. That's my only point, okay? And I'm kind of being smarmy there, because I don't think fascism is an aesthetic. It's not actually an aesthetic, right? Fascism is not about what you say, it's about what you do, right? Fascism is capitalism becoming illiberal, breaking down, and establishing a violent regime based on destruction and chaos to prevent a revolution. Right? That's what fascism actually is. And you could have any kind of aesthetic with fascism. Fascism could be, somebody could have nothing but teddy bears and ponies. But if they're killing millions of people and it's capitalism breaking down and becoming illiberal, that's fascism. Fascism is not defined by aesthetics. And actually, in his book, Fascism and Social Revolution, R. Palm Dutt who was the chief, one of the chief Marxist theoreticians of Britain, makes this point. He says fascist ideology is meaningless. Right? The Italian fascists were into futurist art. The Nazis, they were into more medieval and like Wagnerian swords and castles. Right? Italian fascism was into science fiction and futurism. The Nazis, they were into knights and castles and fairy tales. It was the same system. Ultimately, it was capitalism breaking down and creating an illiberal, murderous state to prevent a revolution. And that's what you need to remember. Fascism is not an aesthetic. But if you want to play this game that Sontag, Adorno, Wilhelm Reich, and others play, you want to play that game, well, that aesthetic that you don't like is pretty heavily influenced by Trotsky. That's all. Okay. All right. Worst experiences with Shachtmanite Trotskyites. Okay. Like, I don't know why the person asked that, but I'll engage that. Shachtmanite Trotskyites. For years, they're not around anymore. The big Shachtmanite organization in the United States was called the ISO, the International Socialist Organization. They're not around anymore. They dissolved into the Democratic Socialists of America. But they have Haymarket Books as the publishing company they're associated with. They were on every college campus. They had a newspaper called The Socialist Worker. And I'll never forget, the first time I encountered them was when I was in high school, 2006, the immigrant workers of the United States. I don't know enough about that, Days of War. I've never heard of that. In the United States, the immigrant workers were protesting. And so at Ohio State University, there was a demonstration of immigrant workers. And some communists that I've been talking to in Cleveland were driving to it. I was a senior in high school, so they picked me up. We drove down to support the immigrant workers at Ohio State University. And at this demonstration, the ISO, this Trotskyite group, they were there, the Shachtmanite Trotskyites. So I bought a copy of their newspaper because I was interested in different newspapers about socialism. So I bought their newspaper at this immigrant rights demonstration. And in it, they had like their three main points. Like what they had like news articles, but they also had like what we stand for, our three main points. And I will never forget this. One of their main points is they said the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, these countries have nothing to do with socialism. Nothing to do with socialism. Not that we don't agree with their kind of socialism. Not that they were, Stalinist and we're... No. These countries have nothing to do with socialism. And I saw that and I thought, what? You have to remember that I had been told all my life communism never worked anywhere, never had any successes. And I discovered I'd been lied to. That we've been told a pack of lies. Socialism has been successful around the world. But instead of telling people the truth, they're just saying, oh, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, these countries have nothing to do with... I saw that and I thought, I never have had an interest in that kind of politics, ever. Right? I mean, if you're going to throw all of our comrades around the world, in China, in Cuba, in the Soviet Union, if you're going to throw every socialist country around the world under the bus and say, oh, they're all the phonies, but I know it. I'm smart. I, the Westerner who's read Shachtman and Trotsky, I know it. And Tony Cliff, he knew it better than any of those people in the third world fighting for their lot. Just the height of arrogance. I just never had an interest in it. And that arrogance, the group always kind of struck me that way. I'm all for people dressing nicely. I'm all for people presenting well. I'm not, I often will criticize leftists for, the way, that for dressing sloppy and all of that. But there's a difference between dressing nicely and dressing preppy. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to wear a suit and tie to be professional, or wear a nice shirt or, but there's a certain kind of preppy look. The Harvard, Yale, elite prep school, and they always just gave me that, we shop at Abercrombie and Fitch and we wear expensive clothes and we're like rich kids and we're smarter than you and we're better than you and we're so cool and hip and we're so beautiful and you can't be part of our club. And I just always got a vibe from the ISO that this was a group of snobs. that this was a group of, not nice people. I just always got this vibe of this is a rich kids club. This is a rich kids club, and we don't like you. That was always the vibe I got from the ISO, and it's weird because I know a lot of people who got that vibe from the ISO who don't agree, who agree with their anti-communism, But for some reason, in my mind, the elitism that I saw from them. This kind of like, we're so cool, we wear expensive clothes, we're so much smarter than you, and the anti-communism seemed to walk hand in hand. The fact that they would throw all of our comrades around the world under the bus, the fact they would repeat all the lies, against socialist countries, right? Oh, socialism's never worked anywhere in the world. It's only just made poverty and misery. And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, that's totally true, but we're just smarter than them. I just they always were off-putting to me. They always gave me a bad vibe. I never had a good feeling about the ISO. Never felt good about the ISO. I had a professor in college who was a Southern guy. He was from Virginia. Or no, he wasn't from Virginia. He was from Tennessee. And he had kind of an aristocratic Southern accent. Like he was from like more of a wealthy family. He was a very nice man. And he had been in the ISO when he was like years ago when he was a young man. And I remember, like, I was telling him that I was a communist, and he said, young man, you ought to join the ISO. The ISO is a spectacular organization of young Trotskyites. They're trying to spread Marxist revolution. Son, if I was in your shoes, if I was in my 20s, I would join the ISO. And it was the sweetest thing. He was a very nice man, and he had good experiences in the ISO, and he remembered the ISO, and he had his aristocratic Southern accent, and it was adorable. I remember that. It was, you got to join the ISO. Why, they are a great group of revolutionary Trotskyites. It was like Atticus Finch telling me to join the ISO. It was adorable. Eurocon. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, when I did some activism in New York City, before Occupy Wall Street, there was a thing called Bloombergville. It was before Occupy. It was kind of an anti-austerity protest against the Mayor Bloomberg and his budgets that was led by the teachers union. And the ISO were a big part of it. All their people were involved. And I remember that they had this very it was like I was in the Workers' World Party and a couple other people were. And as soon as the older Workers' World people would leave, when it was just like the young folks, when we were there to like sleep, at night in one of the tents or whatever, they would start in with, your party supports North Korea. North Korea's evil. How can you support North Korea? And I mean, just this very, I don't know. I was not a big fan of the ISO. It just always struck me as the aspects of the socialist movement I didn't like. They said they were against the bombing of Libya. They said they were against it, but they didn't protest the bombing of Libya. They marched against the war in Iraq, which is to their credit. And I remember there was a big demonstration, a big anti-war rally that happened in Union Square in like the spring of 2011, and they fought not to include Libya in the demands of the demonstration. And there was a demonstration against the bombing of Libya that like marched to the Bloombergville encampment, and they wouldn't join it. They said they opposed the bombing of Libya, but they were so excited about the revolution in Libya, the CIA NATO bombing revolution, that they didn't dare protest the NATO bombing campaign against Libya. They cheered as Libya, the most prosperous African country, was destroyed. And I mean, again, I was horrified by the left's response to Libya, And it's interesting because this is kind of a bonding. This is a similar experience. I've met so many other communists from around the country who had the exact same experience. Dust is in the chat, and he had the exact same experience on his campus. Right, that the great African revolutionary Gaddafi. Libya is being bombed and destroyed, and all the communists, it seemed, either like kind of supported it or did nothing. And it was weird. It was horrifying to me that a great African revolutionary like Gaddafi, a socialist African country could be bombed and destroyed and reduced to chaos. And all these fake Trotskyite, Shachtmanite leftists, Trotskyites, Maoists, whatever you want to call them, did nothing. It's horrifying to me. Utterly horrifying to me. So I don't know. You're asking about worst experiences. Libya, that's the worst experience, There was a big event at Riverside Church to protest against the bombing of Libya, where Ramsey Clark, a former U.S. Attorney General, spoke, where Cynthia McKinney, the former U.S. Congresswoman, she spoke. Leaders of the Nation of Islam spoke. The Workers' World Party, the Party of Socialism and Liberation spoke. Where was the ISO? They didn't come. You know, there was millions march in Harlem, wherein the Nation of Islam called out all their forces to protest against the bombing of Libya. Where was the ISO? They didn't go. They didn't have anything to do with it. All these socialist groups, suddenly they couldn't bring themselves to oppose the bombing of Libya. That's the worst experience. But it wasn't just them. But honestly, even in the communist groups I was in, there was this weird reluctance, right? This weird reluctance to support Gaddafi because he wasn't a true Marxist-Leninist or something. It was horrifying to me. All right. All right, Indian farmers strike. Watch Don Quarter. Don Quarter, he has a channel called Revolution Report. Donald Quarter, great colleague of mine. He does an extensive interview with a group of Indian farmers, with an Indian farmers leader. It's against neoliberalism. Go and check it out. I've not been to Cuba or the DPRK. I've met with comrades from Cuba and the DPRK. I went to Ecuador to the World Festival of Youth and Students. I was able to meet with, a lot of Cubans at that festival, with the North Korean delegation. I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students in Russia, in Sochi in 2017. I met with the Cubans and with the North Korean comrades that attended that festival. I've been republished in the North Korean daily newspaper, but I've never been to North Korea. It's illegal to go now. I think they have a travel ban on it. Cuba, it's kind of illegal, but people break the travel ban. I was almost going to go to Cuba, and then my life took an interesting turn, and I didn't end up going, which is kind of strange. But I've met with the Cubans in many instances. I've been to Venezuela. I've seen socialism in Venezuela up close. I've been to Iran many times. I've been to Russia a number of times. I've been to Ecuador. But I have not been to Cuba. I have not been to the DPRK. All right. Next question. Eurocommunism. What is Eurocommunism? Eurocommunism was a political movement. It was 1978. The Italian Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party, and the French Communist Party had a meeting, and they cut ties with the Soviet Union. They signed a document in 1978 denouncing the Soviet Union and basically saying they didn't agree with the Soviet Union. That's what that was. The Euro-communists, the communist parties, three major European communist parties turned anti-Soviet, and that was Euro-communism. It was kind of a pivotal event in the late Cold War, and U.S. intelligence had a lot to do with manipulating those parties and getting them to move in that direction. That's what that was. Okay, folks, and now we are done because I am out of breath. You guys wore me out. That's okay. I'm gonna be at home, so I got plenty of rest. I'll probably be back tomorrow. Now that my energy has returned enough to do these lives, I'm going to try to do a lot of them. So thanks for being part of this. You guys are really, really important to me, and I really, really value my ability to get on here and engage with you all about communism. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, folks, I'm out. Stay in touch. Stay strong.